Hey everybody, we're back to talk more about Lizzy Albright, fill you in on how we came up with some of the craziness that's in this book. Chapter 2, fantastic chapter, talks a little bit more about the family. You get to know a little bit more about each of the members of the family. And of course, they always say, write about what you know.
Right.
So I started reading about what I know, which is my crazy family. So a lot of them are in here. And kindly, my brothers didn't yell at me for doing that.
That's great. So, Kat, I also want to say that, of course, with any book, you're in the, you're developing characters. You're doing character development. The story is not unfolding yet, but it is character development. And I just want to let people know that as these first few chapters move forward, there are tremendous number of things that are foreshadowing, and you won't even know it. Like, why are they talking about that? And you may not even think that, but I'm just saying there is so much foreshadowing in this first chapter on things that happen later. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, not first chapter, we're in the second chapter. But let's get into the second chapter, and then we'll talk about it at the end. Chapter 2. Happy birthday, dear Lizzy. Happy birthday to you. The whole family sang after lunch as Mrs. Albright presented the chocolate cake illuminated with 10 red, yellow, and blue candles. Make a wish, Mr. Albright said. Hang on, said Lizzy. I'm thinking. But she wasn't thinking at all. Lizzy was just prolonging her moment in the spotlight. She knew exactly what she would wish for. A new red cloak that she had seen a girl wearing in a television commercial. Over the past several weeks, she had mentioned it to her mom, and when the commercial was on TV, Lizzy would say, "Oh, I love that coat," hoping whomever was in the room would take notice. This was her wish. Finally, she opened her eyes. "Blow out the candles," Mrs. Albright instructed. "All in one breath," Alan reminded Lizzy. Lizzy easily extinguished the candles. "Wait for the wishing candle," her oldest brother Doug said. They all watched and waited to see which candle had a wisp of smoke lingering the longest before it was fully extinguished. That was the wishing candle. Doug plucked out the wishing candle, licked the icing off the bottom, and handed it to Lizzy. "Put this under your pillow tonight so your wish will come true," Doug instructed. "Here you go, birthday girl," Mrs. Albright said as she served the first piece to Lizzy. It was a corner piece with extra icing. "Open ours first, Lizzy," Alan insisted, impatiently pointing at a wrapped gift. "Doug and I went in on it together." Lizzy could easily tell by the size and shape that it was a new record album. I wonder what it could be," Lizzy said jokingly. Everyone laughed. She'd loved to sing along to records and was thrilled that her brothers thought to give her one for her birthday. As she peeled back the wrapped album, she shrieked in delight. "It's exactly what I wanted! Beatles 65!" Lizzy had the first 4 albums from the Beatles, and this newest release completed her collection. "I can't wait to play this. Thank you." "And here's our gift, sweetie," Mr. Albright said as he put what looked to be another album in front of her. "Something to counterbalance that rock and roll stuff." She unwrapped the record. "Barbara. I love her music too. Thanks, Mom and Dad." Barbra Streisand had recently won a Grammy for both Album of the Year and Best Female Vocal Performance, which made her a popular favorite. She was particularly popular with Lizzy's parents' generation. The album included Barbara's biggest hit, People. When People came on the radio, Lizzy would sing, "Are the luckiest people in the world," drowning out the superstar. Lizzy loved to sing, and she was very good at it. It was a gift handed down to her from her musical parents. "That's not all, Lizzy," Mr. Albright said. "Here's a string for you to follow." Whenever a gift was too big or too awkward to wrap, Mr. and Mrs. Albright would hide it somewhere in the house and run a long string from the gift to the kitchen. Following the string made for a fun adventure of anticipation. "Oh, wow, now I really don't know what to think," Lizzy said excitedly. She took the end of the string, remembering that last year a new purple Schwinn bike was at the end of the string. Slowly, she gathered the string as she followed it through the kitchen, into the living room, circling around through the family room and back toward the kitchen. The string ended at the kitchen door leading to the basement. She gave a bewildered look to her parents. "Go ahead, sweetie," Mr. Albright said as he motioned towards the basement door. "Open the door." Lizzy turned the doorknob and opened the door. She descended the stairs to the finished basement. She saw what appeared to be simply a large wooden cabinet, but Lizzy knew exactly what it was. A new Magnavox stereo record player and radio. Lizzy stood frozen with her mouth open. "It's wonderful," she finally said. She quickly ran over to the stereo and slid open the top, revealing the turntable and radio. The smell of new electronics permeated the air. "This is for the whole family to use, but we knew that you would use it the most," Mrs. Albright said with a wink and a smile. "Well, you and Doug." Lizzy didn't mind that the stereo was more of a family gift. She was just happy to know she could play her new records and sing to her heart's delight. "Can I play my new records now?" Lizzy asked with excitement. "Of course you can," Mr. Albright replied, "but unfortunately there's only time for one of them. There's a winter storm moving in this evening, and I want to be sure to get to Cordelia before it hits, so we need to get on the road as soon as possible." Doug, being in on the secret that the family was getting a new stereo, had followed Lizzy to the basement with her records in hand. "Here, I have a few of my own that I can't wait to hear on this thing, but since it's your birthday, you get first crack at it." Knowing the boys wouldn't care about listening to Barbara, Lizzy chose to play the Beatles album. Doug had taught her the finer details of caring for vinyl records, as well as how to handle the turntable and needle. When she opened the lid, she noticed a small 45 record already on the turntable. She looked closely and read the title. 8 days a week, she shouted with delight. "It sure is, and it looks like it's headed to #1 on the charts this week. There was an extra copy at the radio station, and they all wanted you to have it for your birthday," confessed Mr. Albright. "Oh my, I'm so happy. Please tell them thank you." She turned on the stereo and lowered the needle down onto the record. The three kids instantly began singing and dancing along to the music. It didn't surprise the kids when Mr. Albright started singing along with them. Ollie Albright was not only a good singer, he was also a DJ for a local radio station and was familiar with all the latest pop music. His famous DJ sign-off was, "This is Ollie Albright, playing all the gold, all the time." Lizzy was exposed to all kinds of music because of her father's profession. His record collection was extensive and even had some stamped with "promotional copy only, not for sale," which meant that it couldn't be found for sale in stores. When Lizzy was little, she always listened to her father on the radio. She believed that because she could hear him, if she spoke back into the radio, he could hear her as well. She soon learned that the radio only worked one way. Once she started school, her school hours kept her from listening to his program, so every evening at the dinner table, Lizzy would ask her father what songs he played that day. Yesterday they had talked about how popular "Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree" had become, especially since it was brand new just this year. After 8 days a week ended, Lizzy changed the switch from 45 to 33 and put on side 1 of Beatles 65. She sat down close to the front of the Magnavox so that she could hear the stereo effects on the album. Since Beatles 65 had just started being sold the previous week, she didn't know any of the songs. She was intent on listening closely and trying to learn them. She closed her eyes. Soon a dull whirring sound alerted Lizzy that the album had finished playing. She looked around to find that she was the only one left in the basement. She didn't mind. In fact, she preferred to be alone when singing along with her records. "It's time to pack the car, Lizzy," Mrs. Albright called down the stairs. "Okay, Mom." Lizzy went over to the new player, lifted the needle, carefully put her records back in their sleeves, turned the power off, and closed the lid. She then skipped upstairs, humming Beatles songs to herself. As Mrs. Albright finished cleaning up from lunch, she turned to Lizzy and said, "Go ahead and bring your suitcase to the garage, Lizzy. I think your father is anxious to get on the road soon." Mr. Albright had backed the station wagon to the opened garage door, and the family began filing out with suitcases and wrapped Christmas presents. Alan, being a typical, curious 13-year-old, inspected each wrapped box before putting it in the car. His sloppy blonde hair swooshed around as he held each package to his ear and shook it. "By the shape and sound of this box, I'd say this is a jigsaw puzzle," Alan proclaimed with certainty. Lizzy rolled her eyes and began humming to herself to drown out the guesses. Suddenly, she remembered she had better act fast. "I call dibs on the very back seat," she announced. The Albright's 1960 Chevrolet Kingswood station wagon had a rear seat that faced backwards. Lizzy always asked for this seat. She had a tiny, thin frame, so it was the perfect space to build a nest with her pillow and quilt. When she was much younger, she would pack the space with several stuffed animals, but now she only brought a book, Fluffs, and her Zenith Zenet transistor radio. The previous Christmas, all 3 kids had received their own transistor radio with an earpiece. At the time, Mr. and Mrs. Albright thought these to be somewhat extravagant and expensive gifts, but the individual personal radios certainly made for more peaceful road trips. "You don't have to call dibs on that seat, Lizzy," Doug said. "It makes everyone want to puke riding backwards." In reality, Doug was fairly big for a 15-year-old. His stocky build made it difficult for him to fit into the very back seat, but it made him the perfect football candidate at school. After one of his teammates got a concussion in a game and had to be hospitalized, Mrs. Albright wouldn't allow Doug to play football anymore. He was secretly happy that he could blame his mom as the reason he left the team. He had started playing electric guitar and collecting rock and roll records. Now he had visions of being a rock star. He recently began to pester his parents for permission to let him grow his hair longer. "I like the very back seat," Alan said defiantly. "Too late. I call dibs first," Lizzy said, reminding Alan of the rules for calling dibs. "Then I call dibs for the trip back," said Alan. "You can't call dibs that far in advance. That's not fair," Lizzy said. Mr. Albright interrupted the squabbling kids and redirected their attention by pointing toward the sky and saying, "Look up there. Hear that squawking sound, kids?" As they looked up, they saw birds flying overhead in a V-shaped formation. Mr. Albright went on to explain, "Those geese are flying south for the winter. You can always tell that it's about to turn really cold when you see them fly in formation headed south." Then Mr. Albright began imitating the geese by flapping his arms and loudly squawking, making the whole family laugh out loud. "Do you think that they're talking to each other?" Lizzy asked. "I suppose they could be. Maybe they're even singing their own version of 8 Days a Week," said Mr. Albright with a wink and a smile. Seeing the flying geese reminded Lizzy that she had not filled the bird feeders in the backyard. She raced back through the garage and grabbed 2 old coffee cans to fill with seeds and acorns. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Albright called out to Lizzy. "We have to get on the road before the storm hits." "The bird feeders, Mom. I'll be quick," Lizzy yelled back. Lizzy ran to the backyard and began filling the bird feeders that were hanging from the 3 Bartlett pear trees next to the fence. She began talking to the birds, even though there were none nearby. "Now listen up, birdies. You have to make this food last a whole week. And Mr. Squirrel, here are some acorns for you and your friends, so leave the bird feeders alone." Lizzy, still humming Beatles tunes to herself, spread the rest of the food on the ground. She headed back to the house, brushing the seed from her coat, when she felt a chill in the air. The sky had begun to turn a dark gray. Hearing a squawking noise overhead, she looked up and saw one goose, all alone. She assumed it had fallen behind the rest of the formation and called out, "Catch up to your friends, Mr. Goose." You need to fly south to stay warm. If you get lost, you can follow us. We're going south too." Lizzy perceived that the bird looked directly at her and imagined that it understood every word she said. In fact, Lizzy always felt that it was much easier to talk to animals than people. "Okay, I think we're all packed," Mr. Albright said. "Everyone, use the bathroom now. We'll only stop once for a break." If he had his way, there would be no stops at all. Even though his tone was serious, everyone knew that if asked, he'd pull over as many times as needed. "I call dibs on where we stop. I choose Whipple's," Alan said, still intent on winning a dibs game. "Don't forget to wash your hands," Mrs. Albright instructed as the kids rushed back into the house. Margaret Albright, who everyone called Maggie, was by no means overly prim or proper, but she insisted on good hygiene and a clean appearance. Her long auburn hair was always neatly teased and pinned into the popular beehive look, held in place with a heavy dose of Aquanet hairspray. Her clothes were properly starched and pressed. Lizzy's hair, on the other hand, was curly, unruly, and flaming red. Being the only red-headed family member, it had once crossed her mind that she could have been adopted. She quickly dropped that notion after she learned that her McHale lineage was Scottish, and the McHales all had intensely red hair. Lizzy washed her hands and looked into the mirror. She let out a sigh as she studied her freckles and frazzled hair. If her dad had given her his brown eyes, her mom had given Lizzy her freckles. They dotted her nose and cheeks in unmistakable abundance. Lizzy did not like her freckles and learned early on that no amount of soap, water, or scrubbing would wash them off. She made a silly face at herself in the mirror, dried her hands, and ran back outside. So I love that chapter because there's so many things that actually I relate to from 1964. But one of the things that's in the chapter that actually came to me from a friend in college is the wishing candle. I didn't grow up with the wishing candle, but in college it's like, oh, that's the last one with the spark. That's the last one with the smoke. That's the one you put under your pillow for the wish to come true. And I was in college when that happened, and I don't know a lot of people that do that, but it's such a cool thing. I put that in the story because I think it's a cool thing.
I think it's fun. That's what writing's all about, putting things in that relate to you and spark your imagination.
Well, speaking of relating to you, tell everybody what your dad did his entire life.
My dad was a radio DJ, like Ollie Albright, so I was privy to a lot of pre-sale information and all the hits that were coming out and things like that. And we had copies that were not for sale, that were promotion only. He later moved into television. But yeah, it was fun growing up with a radio personality.
I'm not letting you skip over that. There's going to be people in the Kansas City area that really need to know who your dad is.
Yeah. My dad was Dan Henry, the weatherman. And if you are my age, maybe a little bit younger, but definitely older, you will remember Dan Henry. The slogan was, Dan Henry said it would be like this. And he was a very well-known and very well-liked weatherman in Kansas City. And that afforded us a lot of wonderful things living in that city. And I'm eternally grateful for it. And he was fun father to live with.
Hey, can I just say, go Chiefs? They won the Super Bowl, right?
And, I had my Chief hat on earlier, and I was like, well, that's kind of tacky. And then I thought, well, wasn't that nice of the Chiefs to think of using Lizzy Albright colors for their logo? Very good forethought on the behalf of the Chiefs.
and I want to give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to your mom, because your mom just turned 96, and she is still living in Kansas City. So hello there, Mom. It's so great.
Yeah.
Now I want to talk more about the 64s especially. Beatles, the beehive hairdos, the rear-facing seat in the station wagon, which I remember my granny had, and it was my seat. I loved riding back there. Did you have one?
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's crazy. And then of course the Beatles were huge. I mean, they were just exploding. And so when we started putting that in there, I have to say, I went online and I researched and I wrote, okay, what's the number one hit? What would be a big Beatles hit? And it just so happened that 8 Days a Week was the number one hit in the United States Christmas week. Now, our story on this day is the 24th, so it's not yet Christmas week, which is why we've got Dad coming home going like it's going to be a big deal. That's going to be the big hit. That's going to be it next week, because 8 Days a Week really was the number one hit Christmas week of 1964. And then I was like, well, then how does Lizzy get that? Because it's it's just dropping as a single. And so her dad gets it as a promo, which is what your dad brought home, promos. And she's so excited. The brothers gave her Beatles for sale because it was the first cut on the B side of Beatles for sale. So I wrote that in there, and then I learned from my Beatle expert, that Beatles for Sale was only released in England. Lizzy could not have possibly bought that, and she couldn't have possibly had the single unless it was like a copy coming from. So the point is, we've got authorities keeping us in check that we're trying not to write anything wrong, but with any book, maybe we did it a little bit wrong and we're going to say artistic license. But Beatles 65, which is in this chapter, came out like 2 weeks before Christmas. Early December, it came out. So she could have gotten that album, and that's the album, and that's why she had to go listen to it, because she wasn't all familiar with all the songs yet. That's real
absolutely
stuff. Real stuff. What else happened to this chapter? I'm trying to remember. We just went through it. The stereo, the gift down in the basement.
Oh, of course. That was such a big part of my life, was playing records and singing to all the records with the stereo. And I would lock myself down in the basement so nobody else would be around, and I would just sing at the top of my lungs after school for 3 hours until dinner time.
I will never forget, my mother worked for White's department store, which was kind of an appliance, home furnishings and stuff. And we bought one of those stereos that it literally was like 6 feet across with speakers on each side, and you opened up the different and had the TV in one area and had the stereo. It's just like this huge thing that was just, we don't see that anymore. And you're right about the electronics, the way it smelled when you opened it up.
That was the best part, new electronics.
So,
too funny. They ought to bottle that and make it a perfume.
I agree wholeheartedly. Now, one of the things that we've not told everybody is the name Albright. Let's talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, we knew is we wanted it to be 2 syllables to make it simple. And then it was your idea to make it something that was just exciting or uplifting or happy or bright, I think you actually said. And I think it immediately popped into your head, as I recall.
I did, yeah. So she's Albright. That just sounds like a great name. So the name Albright doesn't relate to anything in our family. I have actually a Lizzy back in my family and my heritage, but Lizzy's not related to that. I'm excited about where we are, and of course, they're all excited about maybe getting to stop on the road and singing some songs along the way. And we're going to head off and go to Cordelia, Kansas. Oh, there's Cordelia right there. No, Barley, Barley's stealing the show, but Cordelia is the big Great Dane. So Cordelia, my new puppy, my big puppy, she was named after the town where the Albrights are headed to. So
you have got these puppies very recently.
Yeah, I got these puppies on November the 3rd of 2019, and this here is March 2020. So yeah, so they're all 6 months old. 6 months babies.
Yeah.
Well, okay, everybody, we're going to leave you for today, and we're going to come back with an installment of Chapter 3, and we'll see what's happening with Lizzy and her family on the next post. Yay.
Bye.